You do not become a nation without making a few enemies along the way. Welcome to Cross Facts, people, and for today we are going to talk about the top 12 enemy nations of ancient Israel. For this video, we are only going to focus on the deeds committed by nations as a whole against Israel, so no actions of individuals will be counted. Also, we will only look at the acts mentioned in the Bible, so no external history sources. Please note that the nation Judah broke off of Israel after King Solomon died. However, they are practically one nation though, so no need to be confused. We are going to rate the enemy nations based on the damage done to Israel and Judah. So the greater the destruction, the higher up the list they are placed. Those who almost made it to the list but deserve an honorable mention are the Canaanites and Jebusites. Oh, and before we continue, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Okay, back to the list. Number 12. The Romans. The Romans were the descendants of Japheth. Japheth was the son of Noah and brother to Shem and Ham. All post-flood nations date back to Shem, Ham and Japheth. The Romans ruled over Israel during the New Testament. They had strict laws and treated the Jews like second-class citizens. If you were considered Roman, you would have had more benefit than a non-Roman. The Roman may have not directly killed Jesus, but they created a system to which he would be killed. Pharisees were warned that they should not have a political leader whom the Romans did not appoint and who is not loyal to Caesar, thus pressuring them to find a way to kill Jesus. Though I still think that they would have killed Jesus with or without the Romans. Although the Romans were cruel and oppressive, the Bible does not mention much on how they treated the Israelites. And besides, they were more the enemy of Christianity than of Israel. Number 11. The Amorites. The Amorites came from the descendants of Canaan, who was the son of Ham. The Amorites did not let Israel pass through their city. Instead, they attacked Israel. Not only did they cause trouble in Moses' lifetime, they also caused trouble when Joshua was leading. Even though they just killed 36 men during the Battle of Ai, the Amorites embarrassed Israel and made the Israelites fear them. Number 10. Edomites. The Edomites descended from Jacob's twin brother Esau, who descended from Shem. Edomite comes from the name Edom. In fact, that's what Esau was called because he ate the red stew in exchange of his birthright. The Edomites denied passage to Israel from taking a shortcut through their city. In fact, they came out as an army to prevent the Israelites from passing through. They also fought against King Saul and King David. After some time, Edom found itself serving the Israelites. They decided to rebel against Jehoram, who was king at the time, and defeated his army. They also attacked Judah and took them as prisoners. Number 9. The Amalekites. The Amalekites likely originated from the descendants of Shem, specifically from the grandson of Esau named Amalek. They were most likely the first nation to attack Israel during Israel's exodus out of Egypt. The Amalekites fought Israel at Rephidim while the Israelites were on their way to the promised land. Together with the Canaanites, they defeated some Israelites who rebelled against Moses and God by trying to force their way into the promised land. After some time, the Amalekites with the Ammonites joined Moab to attack Israel. Number 8. The Midianites. The Midianites originated from Midian, who was the child of Abraham and his second wife Keturah. Abraham is a descendant of Shem. Working with the Moabites, the Midianites enticed Israel to worship their god and commit sexual immorality. Later, we then hear that the Midianites ruled over Israel for 7 years. They oppressed the Israelites so much that they hid and lived in the mountains for safety and defense. With the Amalekites, they would often come to Israel and destroy their crops and livestock, making them poor. Number 7. The Ammonites. Not to be confused with the Amorites, the Ammonites were the descendants of Shem, specifically from Lot, who was Abraham's nephew. Lot had a son named Ammon, who became the forefather of the Ammonites. When Israel was traveling to the promised land, the Ammonites tried to curse them using Balaam. More on that later. After some time, with the help of the Philistines, they oppressed Israel for 18 years, which resulted in a battle against Jephthah. At a later date, they helped Eglon in attacking and oppressing Israel. During David's reign, with the help of the Arameans, they attacked Israel after the Arameans embarrassed David's messengers. Centuries later, they joined forces with Moab to war against Jehoshaphat and Judah. Later, Baalus, the king of Ammonites, sent Ishmael to kill the governor of the cities of Judah, Gedaliah. Ishmael assassinated the governor, but he also killed countless people he met on his path. In addition, he almost succeeded in taking away captives if reinforcements did not arrive. Number 6. The Moabites. The Moabites share a similar lineage with the Ammonites. Their forefather was Moab, who was the brother of Ammon. They were both sons of Lot, who descended from Shem. Worried of Israel's might, the Moabites with the Ammonites hired Balaam to curse the Israelites. When Balaam was unable to curse Israel, he suggested to King Balak to entice the Israelites to eat food sacrificed to the idols and to commit fornication. During the time of the judges, Eglon, the king of Moab, subjected Israel to his rule for 18 years. Moab, amongst other nations, waged war against Saul and Israel. However, when Jehoram became the new king after his father Ahab's death, the Moabites rebelled again, resulting in war against the king of Judah and the king of Israel. With the help of the Ammonites, they warred against Jehoshaphat so that they could invade Judah. If you thought the nations we mentioned were cruel and destructive, you have not seen anything yet. The previous nations look mediocre compared to the remaining 5 nations. You don't believe me? Let me show you. Number 5. The Arameans. The Arameans or the Assyrians descended from Aram, who was a child of Shem. The king of Aram, Cushan-Rishathaim, and his army invaded and ruled over Israel for 8 years. The Arameans with the Ammonites fought David's army. They attacked Samaria and also went to Apec to attack Israel. After some time, the Arameans killed Ahab, the king of Israel, with an arrow shot between the section of his armor. When the Arameans discovered that Elijah was successfully prophesying their strategies to Israel's king, they surrounded the city of Dothan to capture Elijah, but they did not succeed though. The Arameans later laid siege to Samaria, causing great famine in the city. Food became expensive. The inhabitants ate whatever they could get their hands on, even humans. After some time, the Arameans wounded Joram, which created an opportunity for him to be killed by other adversaries. Later, King Rezin recovered the city Elath that Judah had previously invaded and drove out the inhabitants of Judah. The Israelites were subjects to the Arameans during Jeroboam's reign and were oppressed throughout Jehoahaz's reign. Jehoahaz was Jeroboam's son. Although Jehoahaz broke off from the Arameans' rule, they were nonetheless defeated. The Arameans reduced his army to a shadow of what it once was. During a battle between the Arameans and Israel, the former defeated Israel, capturing numerous people and transporting them to Damascus. They also looted Judah and Jerusalem, sending the treasures to Damascus, and killed all the leaders except the king of Judah, Joash. Joash, however, was severely wounded. They left him with his servants, who ended up killing their own king. Number 4. The Philistines. The Philistines descended from Casluhim, who was a descendant of Ham. At one time they ruled over Israel for 40 years. They were able to capture and blind Samson and had a hand in his death. The Philistines warred against Israel and defeated their army, slaying about 30,000 foot soldiers, embarrassing them and taking their most holy possession, the Ark of the Covenant. They took the Israelite cities, namely Ekron and Gath. The Philistines also looted Keilah, stealing grain. They warred against Saul, Israel's first king, and ended up killing 3 of his sons. They severely wounded Saul, which ultimately contributed to his death. They constantly warred against David as well. Goliath, a great warrior, was also a Philistine. When the Philistines heard that David was crowned king of Israel, they waged war against him. At the later years of David's reign, they almost succeeded in killing David had his soldier not saved him. When Jehoram was king of Judah, the Philistines broke into Judah and looted everything in the king's house. They even took all his wives and children except for the lastborn. They also invaded villages during Ahab's reign as king. Number 3. Egyptians. The Egyptians most likely originated from the descendants of Ham, the son of Noah. The Egyptians created a civilization in northern Africa and was once the most powerful nation in the world. After the Israelites settled in Egypt for some time, when Israel was barely becoming a nation, Pharaoh decided to reduce and control the Israelites by enslaving them and killing the newborn male babies, basically committing partial genocide. He did this because he was afraid of the growth rate of the Israelite population. He thought they might join their enemies. Even after the former Israelite slaves left Egypt, they still fought as slaves for decades, which eventually prevented many from entering the promised land. After some time, another pharaoh named Shishak, with the help of the Libyans, the Sukims, and the Ethiopians, attacked Jerusalem, stealing the treasures of the king's house and the temple. They also stole the shields of gold which King Solomon made. When Necho became pharaoh of Egypt, he advanced to battle against the Assyrians. But Josiah, king of Judah, stepped into battle Necho. Necho killed the king. The pharaoh later dethroned and imprisoned Josiah's son, Jehoahaz, and replaced him with Jehoahaz's brother, Eliakim, whom the pharaoh renamed Jehoiakim. The imprisoned Jehoahaz was sent to Egypt, where he lived the rest of his life. Necho also imposed Israel to pay him taxes of silver and gold. Number 2. The Babylonians. The Chaldeans or Babylonians were descendants of Arphaxad, who was the descendant of Shem. The Babylonians ruled over Israel and made Jehoiakim his servant. When the king of Israel rebelled against the Babylonians, the Arameans, the Moabites, and Ammonites destroyed Judah. When the Babylonians surrounded Jerusalem, Zedekiah, who was king then, tried to escape, but the Babylonians caught up to him. They slayed his children before his eyes. The Babylonians invaded Jerusalem and killed all the other princes. Jehoiakim was then blinded and taken captive. The Babylonians invaded Israel and slew a lot of people, men and women, young and old. They took all vessels from the temple and all the treasures of the king and princes. They burnt down the temple of God and destroyed Jerusalem. Some of the survivors were relocated to Babylon to become servants. Only after 70 years did the Israelites return to their land. Before I made this video, I honestly thought that Babylon would be number 1, because they destroyed Jerusalem and relocated some Israelites. However, that's just a single event. Besides that, they didn't really do much against Israel to deserve the number 1 spot. However, the nation sitting at number 1 did what Babylon had done and more. Without any more delays, let's see who's number 1. Number 1. The Assyrians. Although we are not sure of their exact lineage, the Assyrians, not to be confused with the Syrians, were Semitic people, which means they most likely descended from Shem, like the Jewish people and the Arabs. The Assyrian king Pul advanced against Israel, but the king of Israel, Menahem, gave tribute to Pul so that he would stop invading Israel and so that he would help strengthen Menahem's control on Israel. When the Philistines took their cities, Ahaz, who was then king of Judah, expected help from the king of Assyria, but instead the king of Assyria oppressed Ahaz. Later, in good faith that the king of Assyria will help in future battles, King Ahaz paid tribute to the king of Assyria. But to Ahaz's disappointment, he didn't help at all. King Hoshea of Israel was subject to the king of the Assyrians as well. The king discovered that Hoshea did not pay him tribute, and to make things worse, it seemed that he was scheming with the Egyptians. As a result, Hoshea was imprisoned. The Assyrians then took control of Samaria and relocated the 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel into Assyria. He then repopulated Samaria with his own people. The Assyrians attacked and took over all the walled cities of Judah. Hezekiah ended up paying all the silver and some gold in the temple and the king's house. The Assyrians invaded and imprisoned King Manasseh with hooks and bound him with iron. Unlike the Israelites taken by the Babylonians, it is believed that the Israelites taken by the Assyrians did not return to this day. There are many speculations as to where the 10 tribes of Israel are now, but so far there seems to be no definitive answer. There you have it, people, the top 12 enemy nations of ancient Israel. Do you agree with the placements? Is there a nation we left out? Please comment below. For a more extensive study, please click on the link in the description. It will take you to our blog. It's amazing to see that no matter what hardship Israel faced, they still exist today. That's because God was with them through it all. What about you? Are you facing hardship? Do you need God in your life? If yes, all you have to do is be born again. Please click on the link in the description for more information. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share and subscribe. From me and the CrossFacts crew, God bless. Later, Gedaliah. The Israelites were subjects to the Arameans during Jeroboam's reign, and were oppressed throughout Jehoahaz. Jehoahaz. Yeah. Okay. Was Jehoahaz was Jeroboam's. Jeroboam's is the letters. Yeah. Jehoahaz, huh? Jehoahaz. Jehoahaz. Jehoahaz was Jeroboam's. Jehoahaz was. Wait, I'm getting. Jehoahaz. Say it slow. Jehoahaz. Jehoahaz. Yeah.